have a confession to make. I'm not actually MGTOW, I'm AgTOW. What I mean by that is, I'm an autistic MGTOW. And this is a response to Xpall Odoc's video recently when he tore apart a video from a female autistic. This isn't meant to be an attack video or a pwnage video, nor is it meant to be a white knighting video. The reason for this is that even MGTOW, in fact especially MGTOW, need to have all their facts at their hands, and any mistake needs to be corrected. This video is meant to be one of those corrections.
In today's video, we're going to explore autism, and we're going to start off by looking at this girl and what she has to say about it.
So most of you know that about a year and a half ago I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is an autistic spectrum disorder.
Now there are two things I notice immediately about this young woman. One, she's clearly autistic, and two, she's British. This will be relevant in a short while.
And when I was diagnosed, the doctor said something to me that will probably stay with me forever, because he explained that for autistic people, the hardest part of life is normally childhood. And once you get out of childhood, it can be a little bit of a windy road, but it's not as bumpy as childhood. And when I heard this, I thought, yes, because I was diagnosed at 18, which meant that my childhood was pretty much over and I was getting into the adult side of things.
Like most girls, pretty much all girls, she's very dramatic. She's talking about how she'll remember forever how a doctor told her childhood is the hardest part. And that's just kind of like a general thing that gets said to anyone, like, don't worry, it gets easier when you're grown up. It's just kind of a, hey, look up, hang in there kind of thing.
And this is where I have to disagree. Although what you say about girls is true, in this case you're looking at an autistic, and autistics do tend to be rather dramatic. And while you say what the doctor says is generally true, with autistics it actually means something different, and I believe that this is what she was referring to.
So wrong. I think there's this misconception out there that autism only affects children, and I think if I was to say the word autism to people on the streets, they would automatically think of autistic children.
When I hear autism, the first thing I think about is like an insult.
Well, this shows more about you, or maybe the American culture, and just because it's thrown around as an insult doesn't mean that that's all that it is.
Now, this girl here, she doesn't seem autistic. In fact, I would say she's not autistic, and she's just kind of using it as some buzzword to attention whore.
Now here you are very wrong. So exactly how does an autistic look like? How are they supposed to behave? What you've just done is really no different than telling a gay man that he isn't gay because he doesn't look like it. Now, while some women may use autism as a label to attention whore, does not mean that every woman is an attention whore when she says she's autistic.
But children grow up, and we have many autistic adults in society now, but people don't really acknowledge that. They don't really think about autism in that way, and autism can affect us greatly in childhood, but what about adulthood? And are the struggles the same? No, because childhood and adulthood is completely different. But nobody really talks about the struggles that autistic adults have when they're adults. And today I want to run through a few of the things that I figured out in my very short time in adulthood already. The struggles that I have already discovered when it comes to being an autistic adult.
She is correct. Autism isn't something that goes away when you grow up. Autism isn't something that you have, it is who you are. You're born with it, you'll die with it. But the average Joe is totally unaware of this, especially in America. But here in Blighty we have a better understanding of it. Having said that, we still suffer as adults because people don't see the autism and are less forgiving of it. Autistics still suffer just as they did when they were children. They've just learned to mask it a lot better. But people assume that because they're masking, then they must be cured or something irrational along those lines.
So when you're an adult with autism, people are less considerate of that and don't understand that. So you're expected to perform, behave, and do everything that someone without an autistic spectrum disorder can do. But explaining that to people at this age, you know, they don't care because you're an adult and you're expected to do these things. And it's a lot of just being forced to do things that you don't necessarily feel comfortable with.
This is someone who clearly doesn't work a job and is not being forced to do anything. She pretty much lives the life, and she has the audacity to complain that people aren't respecting her autism.
You have assumed she doesn't work in its own benefits, but she isn't here talking about privilege. The things she refers to are things like looking somebody in the eye, which is very uncomfortable for an autistic. And while a child's eyes may wander and be accepted, an adult autistic has to try and force their eyes into a normal position, which doesn't seem like a problem at all, and yet is a very serious problem for many autistics. This is not something like
she gets everything she wants.
Her life is probably really quite difficult because of issues like this, but as an adult, they either assume that the autistic is moronic or deliberately pretending not to understand what they consider to be fairly basic or simple.
Autism is honestly such a joke.
To you, maybe, but to we autistics, it's anything but a joke.
It seems like the whole psychiatric industry is kind of hell-bent on destroying men and kind of excusing women for their bad behaviors. That's just my anecdotal experience, but I'm pretty sure if I had some scientists, I could prove my hypothesis true.
While I agree with you when it comes to psychiatrists, autism is not a psychiatric condition, rather it's a neurological one. Autism falls under the purview of geneticists and brain specialists, not psychologists nor psychiatrists. Then again, I don't know what it's like in America.
Yes, there are people who have incredible social issues and all sorts of things.
I agree, but that isn't autism, that's social problems. Autism is a very specific condition. It describes people with a different brain structure, as you point out later on in your video.
When I thought about going into adulthood and being an autistic adult, I thought that maybe I would get better at making friends and being social. No. I think the biggest difference with trying to make friends in adulthood is it's much harder to find someone who has the same interests as you.
And as before, this isn't a normal experience that people tend to have. This is a particular autistic problem where autistics have a very focused interest in things, and it is this which can rub normies up the wrong way.
You know, I have not, like I said, I haven't found someone who doesn't drink, so that's a big, thing for me. For someone on the autistic spectrum, I feel more comfortable around people who are like me and understand me and I understand them, and we can get on a deeper level as opposed to just on the surface.
The brains of autistics and neurotypicals function very differently. What this young woman is talking about is actually finding somebody that literally understands you, rather than when people say,
"Oh, I want somebody to understand me."
So when she's talking about finding people that she can be deeper with rather than superficial, she's talking about other autistic adults, rather than the superficial mask that she'd have to wear with neurotypicals.
But these two issues create one big issue, which I'm sure a lot of people like me who are on the autistic spectrum or have autism, full-blown autism, can relate to, which is we feel like we have to conform. And when you get into adulthood, that gets worse. That feeling of, oh my god, I need to conform, I need to be someone who I'm not in order to fit in.
And again, she's not talking about the ordinary angst and fears that normal people tend to have. Rather, she's describing how difficult it is for an Aspie to mask themselves so that they don't come across as weird and make other people uncomfortable.
But when you get into adulthood, you're not necessarily thrown into any of those situations unless you work. And when I worked, I was thrown into a social situation with lots of people who I felt like I needed to be like in order to get on with them.
And again, she isn't talking about social skills. She's talking about masking how to come across as not being autistic.
And then because of that, I started changing who I was and feeling like I'd lost a lot of my confidence and a lot of who I was because of this big issue of having to conform to society in order to feel part of society.
Which is a problem that every autistic adult actually has.
And huge issue and a massive thing, and I don't think it's spoken about enough, especially in adulthood for people with autism.
Oh yes, she's conformed so much with her bright orange hair and her tattoo.
Seriously? She's talking about conforming to the ideals and expectations of neurotypicals. And her bright orange hair is natural, and so what? Anybody can have tattoos, it doesn't mean anything at all. This isn't the kind of conforming that she's talking about.
And she doesn't even realize it. She thinks she's such a rebel.
And again, with the projecting of anti-behaviour onto an autistic, there is nothing in what she said or about how she looked to imply that she thinks she's a rebel.
But she's a true conformist. And she doesn't even work a job. She just gets to do whatever she wants.
Straw man much. She doesn't get to do whatever she wants. Far from it. I can say this from being an autistic myself. And the type of conforming that you're talking about has nothing to do with what she's talking about. She isn't a true conformist in the sense of an autistic conforming to the norms of an NT world.
Very much coddled.
Quite the contrary.
And autism, honestly, it just seems like her excuse.
Excuse for what, exactly?
So after she made that video where she talked about having autism, she made another video because people attacked her and said, you don't have autism, that kind of thing. Like, sure, there were a lot of beta orbiters who gave her a lot of praise, but she's going to hone in on those people who probably nicely said, hey, you seem very normal. So let's see what she ended up saying to those people.
This whole you're normal thing, because it's kind of degrading and it's really not something that anyone on the spectrum wants to hear, because it's kind of like a backhanded compliment. Because in one way you're complimenting us for conforming and fitting into society, which we find very, very difficult to do. So by saying that you're normal and that you don't have an autistic spectrum disorder, you're giving us kind of like a pat on the back and a round of applause because we're fitting into society and we're doing what people want us to do and what we feel we need to do. So a round of applause to us. But on the other hand, you are also giving us a massive slap in the face, because then you are implying that anyone who's on the spectrum who has autism can never be normal and can never fit in and should never be normal, and you therefore think that in order to be autistic and in order to have an autistic spectrum disorder, you have to be different and weird and not normal, and that's not very nice.
What a plain Jane this girl is, other than her red hair and talking about autism. It's the quirk she just needs to keep talking about, and it's like a big insult if you call her normal.
And so it is an insult, because what they are saying is that to be autistic is not to be normal, and actually autistics are normal, just different. Your video does go on for like another 15 minutes or so, but I think I've covered most of the points that I wanted to make. Now, I would have appreciated maybe having a discussion with you. However, this hasn't happened, but take this video as an invitation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not attacking Xpall Odoc. I just feel that it's important for us MGTOW to actually understand correctly and have as much information as possible. So with this video, I'm not white knighting the girl, I'm just looking at it from an autism point of view rather than a MGTOW, because you can be autistic and MGTOW. So while the criticisms that Xpall Odoc makes are very valid when it comes to women in general, this woman isn't talking about herself in those ways. She's talking about her condition of autism, and to understand it you need to know a little more about autism itself. Anyway, this is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please subscribe or become a Patreon.